Hey guys, welcome back to Total Tactics FPL. It's Fran here, and I'm back with the Game Week 13 cheat sheet. As you guys know, Game Week 12 was a blank game week, so we had excluded the Arsenal and City players and also suspended players for that week, namely Madison. Now this week we have all the players back, and it's time to actually reassess what the best players are heading towards the World Cup. As we know, there's going to be a World Cup wildcard, so that means that these four fixtures are absolutely crucial for us to get our transfers right. We need to try and assess who are the priority transfers. And I would just suggest, obviously, just to look at problem points of your team first before looking at priority transfers, because players like Foden and Saka obviously are almost a must-have at this point, but you don't have to necessarily bring in, for example, Saka this week if you have someone like Bowen in place who has a great game versus Bournemouth, and that's just an example. But let's actually head on to the midfielders just to discuss. In terms of the cheap midfielders, Pereira really is the only top option here within the 4.5 to 4.9 range. I really don't think there's any need to discuss between Willock and Bailey. I've already expressed that Willock obviously is much worse option compared to Almiron in weeks past, and this is really just to kind of put the nail in the coffin here with Willock. And with Bailey, of course, a shocking performance once again, but overall not necessarily indicative of Bailey as an individual player, but just simply where this Aston Villa team is at. And that's also why I've changed the FDR so far. We've also seen that the Aston Villa players have dropped and that the FDR is a little bit tougher than it usually would look like, just because they're one of the worst teams in the league. As far as Almiron remains the top option, and within the 5.5 so range and territory, you have Gray here, who has risen. All the other players here, I don't think much has really changed them. As a was an option that we rose last week or 2 weeks past, and he is very consistent so far. Also getting consistent starts in this Crystal Palace team, which is crucial over Olise. However, Gray does have a fantastic run of fixtures, and as we can see here, Everton clearly have just great fixtures. They have teams like Fulham and Bournemouth who are much weaker on defense, even Leicester as well. Crystal Palace, namely, even though they have great fixtures themselves, I do think they're quite an easy team to score versus right now. I don't think that they've shown necessarily anything to suggest that they're a very strong, resolute defensive side like we saw in the previous year, and that's why Everton have a great run of fixtures. The issue, of course, is that Everton has simply been very uncreative. Dominic Calvert-Lewin is obviously back in the team, but I still think Gray is probably the only option to even consider from this Everton team. But why bother when you have someone like Almiron and Eze who are playing for much more consistent teams? As far as the 6 to 6.9 range, I have Rashford as a rise and Rodrigo as a fall. Rodrigo not starting the previous match was part of the reason for why he's fallen, but also simply because this Leeds team have really dropped off when it comes down to actually finishing their chances. Their expected goals are still very consistent, and they're actually creating a lot of shots versus their opponents. But part of that too, I think, is this team simply isn't gelling when it comes down to the front four or any sort of combination that March is actually putting forwards. And even though they've had a relatively easy run of games and they still have two great fixtures within Fulham Bournemouth in the near future, I just think it's a fall here because Rodrigo isn't guaranteed minutes, and it does seem like March does generally prefer Bamford as a player. Rashford, however, does rise, even though he has a match at Stamford Bridge. I just think that Rashford has looked incredible as of late, and this is also part of the reason why you'll see a lot of Man United rises this week. I think they've been very defensively astute outside of the City game, but I think once again, City is a complete one-off in this league, so we really can't consider that, and we have to treat that in isolation. As far as United, though, versus the other teams and specifically in their matches after that Liverpool game, I just think they've continued to build on consistency. And we've seen that too when it comes to things like running statistics and just simply sheer form, right? When you look at someone like Rashford, he does look much more closer to the player pre-injury 2 to 3 years ago than someone who was absolutely terrible last year, which was exactly the case. As far as Barnes and Paqueta, no real changes there. I just don't think that they're the key focal points of the side. And yes, even though Barnes had a great performance this week with a goal, I don't think there's more to come really from Barnes. And with Paqueta, I think he needs to continue building form. As far as the 7 to 7.9 range, I put Saka here in this price territory because he does belong here. Of course, he is about to rise to 7.9 as an asset. He does seem to be one of the top options this week, but do keep in mind that he had a small little knock versus PSV, so do keep that information to hand and maybe assess whether that actually impacts whether you'd like to bring Saka this week. Because I will say that obviously Saka's fixture in the next week is much better. Nottingham Forest at home is just levels above Southampton away, and when you compare it to other assets, for example, Foden, who gets to play Brighton at home, where City are an absolute powerhouse, and even Bowen, for example, with a West Ham team that are incredibly great at home versus Bournemouth, I just think that there's no necessary need to move away from Saka. When you also compare it to someone like Zaha, who has Everton away, Everton are one of the top 3 teams when it comes to expected goals conceded. And even though Pickford has overperformed as a keeper to try to keep Everton in a lot of games, and the defense have in general been quite solid, I just think that Crystal Palace will break that down through. So The question, of course, is whether Saka is worth it this week, and I think the answer probably is not if you have to choose between Saka and Foden. If you already have Foden in your team and you might not necessarily have Zaha, then I can understand moving into Saka this week. It really just depends. If it's a simple transfer from something like Trossard, then absolutely go for that move. Antony is someone who also rises within this price bracket, and I think Antony is a fantastic player. Antony, for me, is someone who, very similar to Rashford, has shown incredible form as of late, and he's actually nailed in this team, right? Rashford will at times play left wing, he will at times play striker. Antony has absolutely nailed down that right wing position, and there's no one really there to contest him. And when you were looking at actually his last match, I just thought he was fantastic all around. We saw him hit the post as well, despite being a quote-unquote one-trick pony, and also just finding great opportunities when he was cutting in. He was also part and parcel of the play that allowed Bruno to actually score his goal. So these are the kind of things you're seeing from Antony, and he's just so diverse as a player that I just really love watching him play. And I think he will absolutely do well, specifically in game weeks 14 to 16, if you wanted to delay that transfer for 1 week. The tough thing is that Saka does have a great fixture in Nottingham Forest in the next week, so it might not make sense to go into Antony because it seems like the West Ham game is much tougher. But when you actually look in comparison, I think all 3 games of the back half there, when you compare it to someone like Saka, Aston Villa and Fulham are much nicer games than Chelsea and Wolves. And that's kind of just my opinion there. As far as the 8 to 8.5 range, nothing's really changed here. Maddison has just simply fallen. I just think that Leicester do have 2 tough games within this run here. A lot of teams have great fixtures, and you already have players within these price ranges that simply have better games. Bowen, for example, is that key comparison there, and he's already started to bang, even though we did see him miss a penalty versus Liverpool, but I don't think that really says much. He is still getting in very dangerous positions, and I think Bowen simply is still the West Ham asset to own. As far as the 10 plus range, a lot of movement here, and I've risen Salah once again, and I know a lot of people will be upset with this. I understand that Salah hasn't really delivered to expectations this season, but simply put, I think he does occupy a very interesting position in FPL because some people have moved off already from Kane. Salah has definitely a better fixture run than Kane, in my opinion, and I think he still has the opportunity, especially versus these weaker teams here, given that they do have that mirror matchup with Tottenham in game week 15, to actually bank on Salah for now, because with that sort of price money that we would have previously used to go into De Bruyne, I really think Foden is the priority transfer here. You can just get someone who's probably as explosive as De Bruyne, someone who's already outscored De Bruyne this season at a much cheaper price. And where do you actually spend that money in FPL? Potentially what you could do is go for a 1 premium structure with Haaland, go for players like Trent, and actually upgrade all the positions in your team. And maybe you would like to not go Salah there. But I just think that Salah in these sea of great green fixtures is someone that isn't really worth passing up, especially if you are on a wild card. And for me, I still think you can still fit a great team in FPL with Salah and with Haaland and with all these great 7 to 8 kind of price range players. So for me, I still think Salah rises simply because the fixtures are just too good. And then with Son and Sterling, I just think they have to fall. Sterling has been rotated too much, even though he's looked very good. Even if you look at those last 10 to 20 minutes that he played versus Brentford, I really think he changed the dynamic of the game. Chelsea suddenly did start to find a lot of attacking flow with Sterling, but still, the lag of minutes is a huge problem when you compare to someone like Salah, who's probably going to be nailed for 85 minutes per game. When you look at someone like Son, who's also equally nailed because there are also injuries for Tottenham, I just think that they have slightly tougher fixtures. That Newcastle game is quite deceptive. Newcastle have been a very incredible team from the defense point of view. Bournemouth away from home is going to be quite a tough game. I think Leeds, they will absolutely trample over them, but that is the last fixture, so you could go for that as a punt, obviously. But then that Liverpool game will also be tough. We know that the Spurs team can obviously counter-attack this Liverpool team. I don't think Liverpool have even been particularly good defensively. Even if you look at the clean sheet versus West Ham in particular, that was the game where they probably should have conceded 2 goals at the very minimum, compared to the City game where I think they actually performed much better defensively. So that's kind of where the stakes are. But the main issue with Son really is I don't think he gels particularly well with Perisic. And on top of that, he just really hasn't shown enough this season for us to consider him as an asset. With Kane, at least you can kind of give the Mitrovic argument, right? Someone who can get a penalty even though he's not involved within a game. And I think that's exactly what you're expecting from someone like Kane, who's going to be a bit more consistent and a little bit cheaper than Son, whereas Son doesn't really have anything to fall back on other than potentially assists from corners, which Perisic has already taken away some of the duties from this season. So that's kind of the picture of FPL. But Fernandes does join the cheat sheet this week. I do think he's an exciting option to own in FPL, but because Rashford and Antony are so interesting, I just think he's probably in a void because Fernandes is playing much more of a creative role this season than someone who has the offensive burden of having to score all the goals. And he might not even be on pens if, let's say, Martial finds his way back into the team in the short future. If we move on over to the forwards, I think there hasn't really been many changes this week, specifically from the last. I do think there has been a slight change of the guard where we now have to reconsider bringing back these these Arsenal assets into our team and potentially considering one more Liverpool forward, just because the run is so sweet and Liverpool forwards are actually quite well priced, especially if you're looking for a downgrade from Kane. For me, Mitrovic and Solanke are still the absolute top options when it comes to the budget territory, and I've deliberately dropped Welbeck, Edouard, and Daka to actually be on the level of Scamacca, because I do think that all these players now are subject to rotation. Welbeck not specifically, but Welbeck is such a poor player when it comes to finishing that I really think, even though he has fantastic underlying numbers, we've known that he's consistently failed to actually meet the expectations of what those underlying numbers represent. And with Man City and Chelsea, of course, that's just a really tough run of games to actually start with. Welbeck is clearly a sell at this point, and I mean, his best fixture is going to be Aston Villa in the last game week, so no real consideration of that in the time being. As far as Edouard and Daka, these are both players who I think are prone to losing their starting positions. I talked about this in weeks past, and of course, Vardy did get the start in the previous match, so that's already an occasion to suggest that maybe Daka is not nailed. I think Daka might even start the next match on the weekend, simply because Vardy's probably not ready to play back-to-back games as a starter. But that's kind of the concern with Daka, right? Especially as this Leicester team does have two tough fixtures when it comes to the lead up to the World Cup. Scamacca is interesting as an option, but I do think he also suffers the same sort of issues with Antonio maybe getting some starts as we head towards the World Cup. So that's kind of the issue there. I do think Scamacca potentially has a little bit more upside, and when you actually look at, let's say, his general flair as a player and his actual skill set, I do think he's got a little bit more variety than any of the players here. He has a very nasty ball in him, and he does try a lot of different things as a player, both inside and outside of the box. But probably actually want to consider when this West Ham team gives him much more consistent starts and potentially even gives him penalties if, let's say, that's taken away from Bowen. I don't think that was necessarily a poor penalty from Bowen, if I'm being honest. I just think it was a great save from Alisson. So I don't really see Bowen losing penalties, which isn't going to be a huge plus to Scamacca until that happens. As far as the sort of range where we're looking at the 7 to 7.9 players, nothing really changes here. I think Tony and Wilson are absolutely the top picks. Potentially Wilson is not the one to go for when Tony actually arguably has 3 out of 4 great games, and Wilson himself has probably 2 out of 4 great games. And Tony, of course, gets that Nottingham Forest game, which is probably better than any of the Wilson games anyways in this run. I do think Tony has absolutely risen to a top level as a striker. You'll obviously see it when it comes to any sort of striker statistics within the Premier League in recent memory. Even if you look at the Chelsea game, for example, where he did find a way to blank, I just thought Kepa actually had a fantastic performance. And Tony probably scores 1 or 2 goals in that match or in a similar match, right, in that kind of situation. And he will have those opportunities versus Aston Villa, Wolves, and Nottingham Forest. The only slight concern with Tony, of course, is that 4 yellow card situation. But I really think that as an FPL manager, it's actually better to actually just value points than to play so defensive and to be so wary of someone getting a 5th yellow card and therefore suspension. So that's kind of my point of view. I think if you own Tony, there's really no reason to take him out of your team. Potentially, you might like to sidestep Tony because you feel like he might get suspended, but I just don't think it's really worth it. The same argument really falls for someone like Jesus, who's looked absolutely exceptional. Obviously, Saka seems like just as interesting as a pick. And the reason why Saka is interesting is because, of course, you can evade that yellow card situation from Jesus and go for double Arsenal attack that way without over-investing into the triple Arsenal attack scenario, which a lot of people probably might want to go into. However, you have the option as well for going for a third Arsenal defender because these Arsenal defenders are so cheaply priced, and we'll talk about them in the next section. Firmino, of course, was someone that we rose in the previous week, so no changes have really happened there. I still think he's a top pick, especially since we might need to monitor the Darwin injury situation. If I really had to compare Darwin and Firmino, the reason why Darwin gets the rise is because I think even if he gets a late start in the Nottingham Forest game where he comes off the bench, I think Darwin is still the superior asset when it comes to just pure goal scoring. Yes, of course, it looks. I would probably look like a clown if Firmino gets the start and gets a very consistent match versus Nottingham Forest. But I do think over the course of the season, we'll see Darwin do better. And I think this is exactly the run where Darwin will slowly start to edge that kind of point barrier that Firmino has already created from Darwin after that red card situation. And the bulk of Firmino's points obviously come from that Bournemouth game where he had an exceptional match. Still the landscape where you can probably consider both options on your FPL wildcard. I know Andy Martin, for example, has gone for that. I wouldn't necessarily advise to go both into Firmino and Darwin. I'd probably still pick Darwin if I was a wildcarder for now. And that's simply just because I think, as I said, going forwards, I think Darwin has more of an option in specifically those Leeds and Southampton games to do better, even if he has a knock this week. Aubameyang has to fall because of the same rotation issues that Sterling faces, and Ronaldo gets to fall because of exactly what we saw transpire in the Old Trafford game versus Tottenham. So that's going to be the forwards this week. No real significant changes. I think it's more just a reassessment of us having to bring back potentially one of the Arsenal players or one of the other top forwards in the league. Mitrovic, Tony, these are players that have been consistent all year round, and Wilson, obviously, when he's not injured, is going to be always a top option. So that's kind of the landscape of the forwards. As far as the defenders this week, once again, it's a reassessment of bringing back these Arsenal defenders into our team, because Arsenal have such a sweet run, even though they have a Chelsea game. A lot of teams actually do have a slightly tough match when it comes to game week 10 because game week 15, because there will be a mirror matchup, right, where we have Arsenal versus Chelsea, and we also have Liverpool versus Tottenham in that specific fixture window. I do think that that's a great time to maybe consider putting on your Newcastle players, playing your Man City players, and even playing, let's say, someone from Man United potentially around that time. Because if we're looking at investing into these top 6 teams, those are the kind of teams to go for if you want to sidestep from potentially Arsenal and Liverpool assets on that fixture window. Of course, Ben White does rise towards the top. He is a new option here. Ben White is someone that we've seen get consistent starts in the right back position. Sometimes he does get rotated out very early in the game, which does remove his ability to get bonus points. But because he's so cheap at 4.5, I just think he's an absolute steal, because he could very easily secure the clean sheet even before Arsenal have a chance to lose it. And this Arsenal team have been very defensively solid. I know a lot of people will probably look towards the Leeds game and suggest that they had a very, very tough time, and that's true. Away from home they did. But Leeds are quite an exceptional team when it comes to actually building chances, at least consistent chances, not necessarily huge chances in isolation, but that's kind of the landscape of FPL. As far as Guecki and Anderson, you have these players who are still at the very top because Crystal Palace still have a very sweet run of games, but I've also risen both Man United and West Ham assets here in Dalot and Zuma. And even though Dalot has a tough game versus Chelsea and Zuma himself has a tough game versus Man United in game week 14, I just think they have very, very great home games. And also, these are both teams that have shown very, very good defensive statistics as of late. Specifically, West Ham when it comes to how good their expected goals conceded stat is at home. And for United, how good they've been since the early parts of the season where they absolutely fumbled it versus Brighton and Brentford specifically. Dunk and Webster do get a small momentary fall, but I don't think this is the type of transfer you should look to move away from. Webster is a great asset, or even Dunk when you're considering him when he's going to play and fill in gaps, as I said, when you have these tough fixtures in game week 15. Game week 16, of course, is another fantastic matchup where I really think Brighton have an easy opportunity to get a clean sheet versus Aston Villa, specifically because they've continued to show very, very good defensive solidarity under De Zerbi. As far as Char and Botman, they do stay at the same position. Same with Justin, Doherty, Romero. Brentford defenders have actually been introduced to the cheat sheet, and they've in effect swapped places with Wolves defense. I think Brentford just simply are the much better performing defense. You also have that mirror matchup there in the future in game week 14. I just think Brentford so far have stepped up, and they just have a very, very simple and easy fixture run, with Man City being that tough game at the very end heading towards the World Cup. But 3 out of 4 fantastic games for Brentford to get clean sheets. I just really think you can't deny that. And with Aston Villa being so poor, with Nottingham Forest being so poor when it comes to actually creating shots, perfect opportunity to really move into a Brentford defender if you'd like to do so. With Wolves, of course, as I said, they've fallen because they haven't really shown us much this season. Even though they actually had a relatively good fixture run heading towards the World Cup, I just think they've actually emerged as one of the worst teams in the league. And the same has actually fallen to someone like Aston Villa, even though Aston Villa actually had much tougher matchups because they've kind of come through a good run of green games that they've really struggled to get points within. So both these assets from these teams fall, specifically Mings, of course, after once again another kerfuffle this week. At the 5 to 5.4 range, we have Gabriel and Saliba reintroduced into the cheat sheet. Obviously, Saliba has gotten a lot of price rises this season. If you had to put a gun to my head, who would I pick between Gabriel and Saliba? I'd probably actually still pick Gabriel because I think he's a still larger set piece threat, but I think there's not much in between them. Saliba obviously is on 4 yellow cards, so that's actually the main difference as well. For who to pick, I would definitely go with that Gabriel at this point in time. As far as Dyer, he still stays in his position. I think Tottenham have just been very consistent, and there's still the chance that they get 2 easy clean sheets versus both Bournemouth and Leeds, and that's probably all you would really want from a defender at this point heading towards the World Cup. Cucurella and Chilwell both fall for the same reasons, as they are actually very easy to rotate between each other. There are going to be times where this Chelsea team is playing in the back 5 or back 4 structure, but when you actually look at the prices of Chelsea defenders, there's no reason to really invest into Cucurella Chilwell because they don't have consistent starts. In fact, it just really signals that if you want to even invest into a Chelsea defender at all, that you should really go into someone like Kepa, who is going to be a fantastic keeper, probably after the World Cup, but could already present himself as a great option for now. Could be an easy clean sheet versus Brighton potentially, because this Brighton team haven't been particularly attacking as of late, specifically when it comes to converting chances. So when we look at the actual premium defenders, I've moved Trippier here. He's obviously got enough price rises to land himself in the 5.5 plus bracket. Cancelo and Trent do remain at the top here, with Trent getting a rise. And that's simply because Trent has a great run of fixtures. Yes, of course, he has this Tottenham game, which is going to be a sticking point here in game week 15. But Nottingham Forest and Leeds and Southampton, these are all opportunities for Trent to get fantastic attacking returns as well, while probably having a fantastic chance equally of getting a clean sheet. So I think Trent actually still independently has more attacking upside than Cancelo. This is obviously not borne out so far this season, but I do think Trent will actually end up being a top asset, and owning both Cancelo and Trent can be a huge dividend, right? Owning Trent might actually just be a little bit better than owning Foden or Saka. We'll see actually how that pans out. Foden obviously has a cleaner run of games, probably 4 good games compared to Trent's 3 good games, and that's equal to obviously Saka's 3 good games. But I really think when you're considering, let's say, your FPL team and you're independently looking at what assets to bring, do remember that Trent's going to be a top option and see if you actually have space to incorporate Trent into your team. So moving on to the last position of the cheat sheet, we do have actually the goalkeepers finally. The only change I've done here is to move Meslier down. I do think Pickford actually has a fantastic run of games, so there is a clear separation between both Pickford and Meslier there. Leeds do have 2 tough games, and simply put, I don't think I've really been impressed by the Leeds defense as of late. Everton, we talked about how they've overperformed, but potentially that's because Pickford is a great keeper and a great shot stopper specifically. However, Everton just have a clean run of games, and maybe you could even argue that they should deserve another rise towards that second tier there, specifically maybe over someone like Brighton and Sanchez as a keeper. In terms of the 5 to 5.4 territory, I have risen Ramsdale. He obviously actually has a very clean run of games. I'd argue both Pope, Salah, and Ramsdale all have equal opportunities to get hauls, right? Because with Wolves, you have a different opportunity to get points where you can get save points, and Salah can, for example, in that Leicester game, get a mega haul. Whereas I would say for both Pope and Ramsdale, they're both keepers who have great fixtures on paper, and especially because their defenses are so airtight that you're really looking for clean sheets specifically or absolutely nothing when it comes to them. So the trade-off there is the kind of clean sheet percentage versus how many saves and how many bonus points that Salah can get. And I think it's quite even between the 3. As far as Ederson and Alisson, I think they do rise as top options. And I think the reason why they've risen as top options is because with City, once again, the clean sheet percentage was so much higher. They have 4 out of 4 great fixtures. And with Liverpool, even though they've actually kept clean sheets as of late, there's actually a lot of work for Alisson to do. He's getting a lot of bonus points, even in spite of actually making these penalty saves and things like that. So I do think Alisson has shown fantastic opportunities to actually do good when it comes to actually getting save points. And now that this Liverpool defense is actually playing, I think, specifically with a lot of heart, and I know this can't be quantified in FPL, but I think you can just see that when it comes down to how much aggression they are putting into defense and how much less lacklusterness we're seeing from individual defensive chances. Yes, they're still kind of very open as a defensive team, but Alisson has shown to be extremely formidable as of late, and the fixtures are still very, very good when it comes to clean sheet percentage. So that's going to be my cheat sheet for this week. I hope you guys have a wonderful week ahead, and I'll see you guys with my team selection.